Hello, everybody. My name is Jake. Today I am here with Jolie once again for what is this, fifth episode
I think
of
so.
Seriously? A business podcast. This week we were going to talk about resumes and the art of almost the opposite end of the interviewing process. How do you get a job in this economy of
The starting
fake.
point, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and there's, like we talked about the fake job epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about how to interview, how to be an interviewee a little bit as well. And I think the next logical step to jump to
How do you get
is
that interview?
prepare what? How
How
to
do you
get that
get that
interview? Yeah,
interview?
yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Make the resume. How do you put it together? How do you present it? As well as things like cover letters, because that's an important topic as well. But let's start with just, I guess. Well, let's start with, to make this as simple of a guide as possible for future listeners. Let's start with, what is the purpose of a resume? Where do you begin? But like when you're sitting down, you're like, I have to make my resume, I have to prepare this list of things. What is the most important things to prepare? I think that's the starting point. Maybe even younger listeners might be looking to find.
Well, excuse me. Most professional jobs are going to require a resume. If you're applying for a hourly job or a service job, you may not need a resume. So this would be really tailored towards more professionals entering the workforce or seeking that next job perhaps as well, which of course are your listeners. And the purpose of the resume is to communicate what your experiences are and to showcase why you're qualified for whatever position you're being considered for. And so your resume should be crisp in that it's not a dissertation. It should be clearly organized to identify where you worked, when you worked there, and what you achieved. It should have your title as well, if you had a title. But really the meat of the resume is, who are you professionally? And so there's a lot of things we can talk about next, but that's the purpose of the resume, is to communicate you as a professional in a concise way that allows someone who's assessing you to determine if they're going to pursue you beyond that piece of paper.
Basically, like, well, I mean, we use the word resume as like a cultural term now, where it's like, what's your resume?
Or
you know?
CV. We talk
Or
about
CV,
CVs.
that's another word for it, which can be confusing because I know people who confused CV for cover letter many times. But yeah, so we'll start just kind of where I first learned about resumes, right? Because I think a lot of people are going to be in a similar boat because, as we have talked about off podcast, right, what they teach you about resumes may not be the best guidelines, at least in my experience.
I think what you've shared with me you were taught may not be
Yes.
ideal in the business world.
Yeah. So I'll go over at least the things I was taught, because I remember the first time I was told about resumes was in high school. And they taught you to put your 4 most recent things, as in job experiences. Write down your 4 most recent, no matter what it was. And the way they gave it is, it gave you like a layout. They said, here, put 4 things, put your name at the top, put like your micro pitch in the description at the top. And then at the bottom, if you have space, put skills or certifications or awards, right? And for audio or visual watchers watching on YouTube, and for audio listeners information, we will have visuals for this episode, so you'll see what I'm talking about on the screen now. But that's how I was taught in high school. Moving on from that, I'll go over each one I was taught at what stage, because they were different. In college, it was a little different depending on who I asked, because I did film and writing, right? So 2 separate fields. In the film field, resumes weren't really a thing, because it's more about what did you do, right? Not so much where did you work. It's, okay, what set were you on? What credits do you have? So for a film resume, which is a little different, at least they told me don't focus on your job positions as much. Maybe have 2 or 3 of the most recent you were on, but list the films you worked on and what you worked on in those films. So you'd have a section like, I was a director on this. I was an audio engineer on this, right? And that's how they would do those, which makes logical sense to me. You would still have the stuff at the top with your name and the pitch and whatever. But most of the time it was just name your I guess your film accolades is a way to put it. But writing was the most interesting because that was the place where I got knee-jerked the most around when it came to resumes, because I came in with the high school resume I had, or the style. And I had this fantastic professor who actually she retired from the college the year I graduated. So that was pretty interesting. But she was a fantastic teacher, and I had her for a class called Careers for Writing. And she made you do an elevator pitch as your final, which I thought was hilarious. But part of that was doing the resume, and this is the one you have seen, right? And the way she wanted to do a resume was very, very old school, is at least how she called it. And besides a very slight visual twist I gave to my own, because I like visually it to be a little different, it was the same idea as high school. Most recent positions, what are your most important skills? And then she had the weird advice, which, not to fault her or anything, I don't know if this is just her way of thinking, she didn't want you to adapt your resume. She just said, have your 4 most recents all the time. And that seems wrong to me, but yeah, I have a newish resume now thanks to your help and some of the people you know. But let's go through all those like step by step. That's a lot of information, so let's just start like at the high school phase. But what's your insight starting there, at least?
Well, I think if you don't have a lot of experience, which you wouldn't in high school, it probably does make a lot of sense, although that's not the space that I play. So I'm just telling you it's my opinion. I don't have a lot of experience helping high schoolers write resumes.
Well, yeah, but an HR person's opinion's probably a lot more valid.
But I would say if you don't have a lot of experience, focusing on things that you've done that would show commitment, that would show, if you've done volunteer work, if you've been engaged in hobbies that are related to the type of work that you're going for. If you don't have experience, you want to show something, right? And the one thing that I will say that stands out to me in particular is some longevity in whatever you have been doing. Now, when you're 18, longevity may only be a year, right? And I can remember when I was in college, we didn't focus so much on resume because it was a very static, this is exactly what a resume should look like, don't deviate from the resume. But we focused on who should you have as a reference. And so it always stuck out for me, you would never list somebody as a reference who hadn't known you professionally for a year. Now, when you're in high school, that might be a little bit hard, right? But let's say you're not going to go on to college, or you're going to go to a tech school, and maybe you're applying for a job that's part-time or in social service or something like that. Showing your interests would be there as well. I was part of this club, or I was involved in this activity. I think all of that makes sense from a high school perspective. Now, once you're looking at that, let's say that first post-college or post-technical school, but post-graduate higher education of some sort, you do want to be able to demonstrate those things that you have done that are related to whatever field you're going into. So I can't talk a whole lot about a writing degree or the film piece.
Yeah, of course.
But what I would say is, and I put some notes because sometimes I wax lyrical, it is very important to customize your resume.
I agree.
You do not want to, because you're going to be applying for some jobs that are adjacent, that aren't directly in your maybe experience, but are close to your experience. So let's say, for example, you have somebody who's getting out of college, maybe they have a psychology degree or a writing degree or an education degree or something, and they don't find something right away, and they say, because I see this a lot, I want to go into HR. Maybe they don't have an HR degree. But there are things in those fields of study that are relevant. And there will be experiences that you could showcase that are HR adjacent. And so you don't want to just give me a resume that says, oh, I worked at the Technical Center on College for 4 years. You're going to want to pull out of those, I provided service, I answered questions, I was a resource to the individuals who came in. So you're going to want to tweak it a little bit so that I look at it and say, oh, I can see that you understand, not so much that I'm digging for it, but that you understand what would be adjacent to this space. And that is important. So I don't think that was the best advice that you got. Another thing that I would say, and I actually had this with a fairly experienced person not that long ago who was interviewing to be a supervisor level position. So they had experience on their resume. It looked like they had about 8 years of experience. And it was all pretty much in this functional area they were applying for, but it was a little random. It didn't show a progression. And that's a lot of times what, someone who's screening your resume or hiring manager is looking for, some natural progression. As you grew in experience, you got more complicated jobs or positions or projects, even if you were at one individual company, maybe even in one job, but you're going to show this progression of things that you've done that became more complicated or less oversight for the work that you were doing. And so I was interviewing this individual, and I wasn't that impressed with the resume. I wasn't really quite sure why she got passed on to me. And then as I was talking to her, she's giving me all these experiences that aren't on her resume. And so I listened for maybe 10 minutes, and then I said, I'm completely lost. I am looking at your resume, and I don't see any of that on your resume. And she said, oh, no, you don't ever put anything beyond 10 years on your resume. And I said, okay, so how much experience do you have? Oh, I've been doing this for over 20 years. I said, okay, so I want you to take me through when you started, and I want you to progress, and I'm going to take notes on this because I can't tell who you are from your resume. Everything that you're talking about isn't on this piece of paper, and this is kind of like what you submitted as your Bible. And, to be completely honest with me, with the listeners, she said, well, then you're wrong if you think any resume should be longer than 10 years. And I said, well, I've been doing this over 35 years, and my resume covers my very first professional job because that is important to do. And you're never going to give yourself enough credibility. And quite frankly, I was disengaged and done with her the minute I found out her resume didn't even reflect who she was. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't going to bring her into an HR job where that's part of our responsibility is helping people show well. And so that's probably maybe more of a story than your listeners wanted to hear, but it is really important that your resume represents all of who you are, not just 2 or 3 experiences.
Yeah.
I think another thing that's really important is, resumes should have active words in them. Mm-hmm. So not, I administered X or I completed Y. You want to say, I engaged, I drove, I delivered, I collaborated with others to secure, put whatever that isn't. Because anybody who's looking at that is looking for an initiative. They're looking that you own it. You're going to be responsible for it and you accept responsibility. You don't want a resume to read like, I sit here and wait to be told what to do. Mm-hmm. And if you don't use active words, that's kind of how it reads.
Yeah.
You also want to make sure that you put on your resume the things that you're most proud of. So, your resume shouldn't be a laundry list of these are all the tasks that I did. And a lot of your listeners are new, and a lot of the jobs may have been I executed what I was asked to execute. But mm-hmm. you do want to show those things that, I was given a social media platform, but I tripled the output on the hits on that or something.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, I delivered 400. Well, I don't know what the expectation was. Was the expectation 800 or was the expectation 100? And then what you do when you're you get that interview is you talk about how you did that. You don't want to put that all on the resume, but you want something that I look at and highlight and say, I want to know more about that. That's intriguing to me. That's interesting.
Something I was told one time, and this is something I actually really liked about the college experience I was given, is the professor who gave us that resume class said your descriptions for your job should read like the first line in a book. Right?
That's great advice.
It should be a clear, conceited opening to an idea. So instead of saying, at least going into, I executed X and Y and Z, I executed X, Y, and Z for W purpose, right? You say, I did X at X for X reason, and then you'd be like, oh, interesting. Okay, why did you do this, this? And those are you want to basically almost, you want to fish for questions.
You do.
With them in a way.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
And you use the word conceited, and I would say I understand exactly what she's saying. You don't want to come across arrogant.
Yeah.
And I think one mistake, and I don't know if I can't remember if we talked about this in the interview process, but on the resume is when it's I.
Never use pronouns.
Yeah, you want to make sure that it's a team effort. And I think I learned that pretty early in my career because I started out with a Japanese company and nothing was ever I. Everything was about we. Mm-hmm. And so now, even at my level, sometimes, especially maybe at my level, I'll say to somebody, I was just talking to somebody in the HR team that needed to do something, and I said, well, we need to do X. And she sat there and looking at me, and I said, I should be more clear. I'd like you to go and do that. Because to me, it's always we. I'm supporting, I'm directing, I'm also accountable, I'm responsible. And when I sell up to my senior leaders, when I'm talking about my peers or whatever, I want it to be an effort of my entire team, not. And I do want to spotlight people. Sally did this, Bobby did that. I want to make sure I give them credit, but I don't want it to look like it's all mine.
Yeah, and I think something that, because I know many different people from my college who I would have to tell bluntly, swallow your pride.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, even if you don't want to go like, we, you should say, I worked with the team, or I supported the team.
The team got this
You want
done.
to focus on the team aspect, especially since most roles work with teams.
Collaboration.
You need to clearly put that collaboration effort, even if in reality, say only you did most of the work, it's still very important to reference it as a team because that's the headspace you need.
Right. Now, I would say if someone specifically asks the question, well, how much of that was you? That is your opportunity to say,
that's your time to open up.
I owned this piece of it, but you don't want to throw the others under the bus and say, nobody did anything but me, right? Yeah. What you want to say is, I owned this piece of it. And, some of the other team maybe struggled a little bit because this was a new task. Mm-hmm. And so I really did work with them and help support them so that, together we could get the project done. That's a great answer versus saying they all sucked and I did everything.
Yeah. Think about it like this. Think about it as like those middle to high school group projects no one wants to do, but you have to, everyone takes credit for it. That's what you have to view these as. And I know a lot of people who really would not like to do that, but that's just kind of how it is, at least in the presentation sense, because the idea should be, you can even use that to your advantage. You want to phrase it so they ask you a question about it.
Yes, you do.
And then you can be like, well, yeah, so me and the team worked on this, kind of like you said, and then go into the more specifics of, this was my part of it. I did this. It was a team effort overall, but I focused on this, this, and this. Because you want to not come off as individualist. You don't want to be like, I am this, I am this.
I can't be part of a team.
Yeah, don't do that.
But, you said something that, let's just be honest. I hated group projects too. Now, at my demographic, I didn't have as many as I'm sure you had. And
God.
I see that my daughter has, who's, still in high school. When we grow up, we don't really like group projects either.
No one likes group projects.
Let's be honest. But in the professional world, everything is a group project. And so that's why you have project management. And you do have to figure out, those swim lanes and when do you get out of your swim lane to help somebody and not. So the rest of your professional life is going to be about group projects. And so that's part of how your resume should set you apart from others is that, you want to at least on paper initially sell, I understand how to be part of a team. I understand that I don't want to say a cog in the wheel, but I am part of something much bigger and I need to do my work.
Here's a weird comparison that's out of left field entirely. I'm sure everyone here has watched Pixar's Cars.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be Lightning McQueen in the last race.
Yes.
That's who you want to be.
Yeah.
You don't want to be the green guy. Because
Yes.
how people act in real life, at least from my experience, everyone is the green guy. You don't want to be the green guy. You want to be the red guy who helps the blue get over the line. Sure, okay, you're not going to be the center of attention the entire time, but people will respect you more for it.
Yeah, and we all will have, especially those, the individuals that rise to leadership roles, there is a small element of narcissism that serves us all well.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong. But, and maybe we should talk about this in one of our future episodes, but being a leader of others is a incredible burden that people don't always understand.
Yeah, it's not as easy as people make it out to be.
You should always be thinking about what's best for them. Now, everybody, myself included, have had experiences with leaders that wasn't the case. And people leave leaders. They really don't leave companies or jobs. But you need to learn that as you're moving up. And some of it is how you talk, how you sell, and how you explain what you've done. Even once you get the job and you're there, and maybe we have another one on performance reviews, even how you sell yourself in a performance review, because a good company will have you tell me as your leader, what did you do? What did you achieve? What are you proud of? And even then it shouldn't be I, even though maybe things were only you, but you want to demonstrate and explain how you got things done with others and through others and independently. So getting back on this. So another thing that I have heard, which I always kind of scratch my head, when I was first entering the workforce, it was your resume should never be more than one page.
Yeah.
You know what?
That's a big thing.
The truth is, most resumes are going to be more than one page. Unless you're very early to your career, you're going to have things that you want to put in there. You're going to want to put your education in there, skills and abilities. I put like nonprofits and boards and things that I set in on. I put down different assignments that I've had internationally, because that's all part of my scope and my responsibility. So I would tell your resume probably shouldn't be 5 pages long. It should be as long as it needs to be to demonstrate that the career experience that you have and the credentials that set you apart. My resume for 35 years is 2 pages. Now, the earlier experiences, where when I was first working were maybe this much space on a page, they're now maybe a sentence. And that whole 10 years is consolidated into maybe a sentence or 2. And then the next experience is maybe a sentence or 2. The last 2 or 3, for me, which encompass almost 20 years, are the longest. And that's okay. Another thing that's important to think about in your resume is if you change jobs within one company, you do want a separate call out for each of those.
You want separate regions for that.
Yeah. I see a lot of resumes where I'm talking to somebody and they had this title, and it's very confusing because maybe they were an entry-level specialist and 5 years later they're a VP. That's kind of an oddity. And I probably, if I was grade resumes A, B, C when I'm initially screening, I might make that a B or a C and say I'll come back to it, because there isn't a logical flow there. It doesn't make any sense. It would have made more sense to say, well, I hired in as maybe, in a general administrative job, and then I moved up to a manager, and then I went from there, because at least it shows some progression. And I think that's another thing, and maybe this is specifically for you and other content creators or individuals that have their own company, putting I'm CEO of something and you're 23 years old, that's not impressive. You might think that's impressive, but that's really not that impressive. What you want to say is I'm an entrepreneur and I have this organization that I am establishing. But you need to be cognizant of the majority of people that have that type of a title have lots of experience, and a CEO position. I mean, you can be a founder, you can be whatever, but it's better to show some humility, which is that balance to that. What was the word you used? wasn't arrogance, but
Conceitedness.
Conceitedness, yeah. You have to balance that, so you have to have that balance. So that's another one. Another one that I think is really important, if you don't have a lot of working experience, pull out those other experiences that you've done, whether you volunteered on someone's project. I know you have a lot of people right now that are, well, not a lot. You have a number of people who are in your company that are really working almost like on a commission or on a deliverable level.
Yep.
That's not really working experience for them because they're not drawing a regular paycheck, but it is good work experience.
It is experience
and
on a resume.
And they should pull that through. And that's a wonderful thing that I know you're very committed to, in giving those individuals an opportunity to get the experience and then paying them when they hit thresholds. That's still experience that you should spotlight.
Well, and I also want to mention, because as being a new company, the reason I want to pay living wages, but the situation is like we can't right now. Yeah. But the main thing is,
but you do pay them for deliverables. That's
100%, yeah. And when we set up the company, because we set up 2024, you know, so we're fairly recent. But I remember I sat down with those individuals one-on-one, and I was like, would you want this experience to have? Because I know a couple of them still go to college. I know a couple of them still have schooling otherwise.
And maybe be working other jobs, and this is a side gig, and that's good too.
Yeah,
that's goodness.
Our head of video games, right, worked as a computer scientist thing, but I gave him that position because he was like, I really, really, really like making games, right, and he never had the opportunity to be focused on it. So I know, like, we gave him a budget, and we're like, all right, here's your budget, make a game. You have a year, and now he's really going and having a great time.
And that is an experience for him, because if that game pays off financially, he'll be rewarded.
He'll be rewarded
a
lot. Yeah, because when we write very similar to many of our projects, when we write our contracts, we are very generous towards the person working on it, because the company can take whatever, that's fine, right? But most of it is like, those people should have a good experience. So that's how we do it, at least in our current state. But yeah.
But those are great resume builders. So my whole point of that was, find those things that you've done, even if you were helping out a friend. Maybe it was I got paid based on a deliverable, or you have artists that you retain for some of the books that you've published, right? And so they've gotten some small payment for that. They didn't really do it for the money. I think they did it because they love it, they enjoy it. We all need money to live. We all have to pay our bills. We all have to eat.
Video listeners, we do have a kitty
on my lap.
So if you hear purring in the audio, that's
her.
Love you, audio listeners.
Yeah. So, but at any rate, that's my point, is pull those things through, because you might be surprised how much of that, when you really sit down, and I usually suggest, when I'm working with a younger person, that sit down with a pad of paper. I have a pad of paper in front of me here then, and jot down your thoughts and say, well, how do I build that out? You don't want to create something that isn't true, but you do want to expand on those things that show you have the experience you need, even if it isn't a paid job. Kitty's rubbing all over the microphone.
Yeah, I'm sure audio listeners, you will hear the purring of the kitty. You can find us on YouTube at Faux Productions.
So another thing that I had in here is...
Well, actually, can I jump in real quick before we get there? We were talking about resumes and putting work experience on it, right? And I want to share a story that you were mentioning our artists. We had one of our artists who goes to a school in California, right? And I remember, because they're like, Jake, how do I make a resume? So I sat down with them and gave them my experience. And I remember they told me, yeah, my professor was really confused when he saw that I had credits in a book. And I was like, oh, really? And because he has been in one of our published books before the company was a thing. It was published by me directly. And he was in that. And he's in our current book project, which releases in like a couple months. So that was big for him. But also, I wanted to point out is when you're talking about take any experience you can find, right? We're even talking like, to my extent, when I put stuff on my resume, I think a big thing to add in, at least from my experience, that people really react positively to, is depending on your space, certain even own hobbies would be very good to put in. A great example, I have this story of a individual who worked at a large game company. And he was basically just a writer for this company. He just wrote quest lines and stuff like that. But he wasn't given any major jurisdiction over anything. Turned out he was sitting at his desk one day, and his boss comes over and catches him doing something personal, right? His boss is like, "Oh, what are you doing?" He's like, "Well, yeah, I'm writing D&D campaign. I run D&D at home for Dungeons and Dragons, for those who don't know the terminology." And his boss is like, "You run Dungeons and Dragons? How long have you been doing this?" He's like, "Yeah, I've been doing it for like 5-6 years." And he's like, "Yeah, we're just going to give you some full-on quest areas to design, because that's something that it tells him. If you can run a D&D game, you have knowledge of quest design, you have knowledge of narrative design." So just small things like that. And I remember that person went up to eventually be a narrative lead for the next project. So even those small things you wouldn't even immediately think of as important experience, put it in, and at least write it as a hobby or an interest. And sometimes they'll even pick that out and be like, "Oh, tell us more about that." Because I know in my interviews, I have been called out multiple times about like, "Oh, so you do like event hosting?" And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, I run winter events sometimes for companies. I run yearly games with a bunch of different groups where we just play games together, like tabletop games." So, those are things that are important to at least find a place for on your resume, not remove space for them. Obviously, I think job positions are more important, but it's an idea to have them on your resume, because those can be some of the most important additives to your resume.
Especially when you're a little light on paid experience.
Exactly.
Those are things that really do set you apart. And that was another one of I only put down 6 points because I didn't want to bore the listeners. But you want your resume to be unique. And so I think you said you were going to put up some visuals. There is a very standard resume, that you put all of your things down. I really like it when you use the entire page, and maybe you have a banner on one of the sides.
Yep.
That talks about, these are all the things I'm passionate about volunteering in. I put in there all of my international assignments, because specifically at my level, it's interesting, and it might not pull through because I was U.S. based, but I had, maybe 20 other countries that I was actually facilitating work in. I put in there like board seats. I do have the opportunity to sit on different boards, and that might be where you could put those hobbies. I put in there different certificates. I'm an IO psychologist, so I actually have a lot of certifications on psychometric tools. I put that in there because for me, it's important for, I believe, anyone who's looking at my resume to understand, I am a certified counselor. I am a certified comp professional. I have different things that pull through that show that I've invested in myself, and I continue to invest in myself. So figure out how to do that. I think Jake's going to pull up some possible samples, but you don't want to put your resume like on pink paper or orange paper or something that's just, people are going to go, yeah, narcissist, put it aside. But you do want to think about, how do I do a layout that's a little bit different than what everybody else is seeing? And I know you had showed me before you got out of school that you had like a digital resume.
Oh yeah, so this is actually something I want to cover too. Yeah, so because my experience specifically is all over the place. I know there's some people similarly that have experiences in a lot of different things, who look for positions in all over the place positions, right? Which is why I ended up being where I am now. But I think one thing that was even revolutionary for that Careers for Writers class that they thought was really cool is not only having a resume, but having that resume link back to another resume online. I have a website, which actually people can feel free if they want to go look. It's just my name, jakepaver.com, I think, or .me. Where on that site you can go to the resume section, and it's just a website-based resume. You can scroll through every experience I've ever personally
had. Like videos and stuff out there too.
That's there's like a film portfolio on there, photography portfolio on there, and the idea behind those is, especially for my field of like film and stuff originally, you needed a way to present all that information in one place. And something I got really sick of doing was when you submitted a resume, you'd have to upload a bunch of videos. And eventually we just fell into the portfolio link situation. And a lot of people just use like a Drive folder or something. And I'm like, But that's kind of boring. You know, it's like if you just have a drive folder and it's like, oh, they have to go in, they click on it, wait for it to load. Not worth your time. So what I ended up doing is I use, personally, this is not a sponsorship, just to be clear, but I use Wix because I love Wix as a website tool. And I use that to make my own website. I pay for my own website. And on there, I have all my videos. I have all the publications I've done. I have all my business related stuff, like my current business for this and things like that. And many, many other things that are all in one place that are easy to find. Because I know a lot of people have like a digital resume online, but then they have a portfolio there and a thing here. If you could keep that as together as you can, it's easier when you submit and you're just like, you need a portfolio website, bang, there you go.
Well, and what I would suggest, and I might be a little bit ahead of my time. I think I probably saw your digital resume 3 or 4 years ago. I still have not seen any of those in corporate America.
Yeah.
But it is unique and special enough. And I even have an orientation issue that I use on my own resume that I worked at a very large multinational, and all of the executives went through how to create our professional CV within the company. Now, it served us well as we've left, and I can literally spot if somebody was at that company because their resume will have a similar orientation on the page as mine. So we learned well, and it is very eye-catching. Whenever I've shared it, I always get people to say, that's really unusual, your resume is really unusual, and that's what you want. But I do think that we may be going closer to what you saw. I think it probably is coming from a creative world, but it is interesting enough that I can't speak for you and whether or not anybody comments when you've sent out your resume. I know you're not doing that a lot right now because you're making this business thing really work, but there is a question of, how is it received? I thought it was fascinating because I love new and different things. If you're applying, to kind of a staunchy company, maybe they won't think that's as cool. Maybe they're not going to take the time to go out and click on the link, but most of us are on the computer most of our day. It takes 2 seconds to go out and in a browser type that and look at it, and then you're like, well, that's really unusual.
Well, and what I think is also very interesting is, and I remember this very clearly because my own resume website has gone through many, many different looks, and my original one that I made, late high school, I think, because it was part of my film program at my high school, was to make a digital resume. And I remember, it was a resume site is what we called it then. It was a side class, but something like that. I remember that version was not very good.
Well, we learn and grow.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Like, don't get discouraged, because I remember my original website it was a black and white theme, which is very boring. The front page was just a giant block of text, which was a massive mistake. And that happens, right? Because you shouldn't expect yourself to be a pro website designer out the gate. It just doesn't happen. And my current one is the work of when I went to college and I went to that Careers for Writers class. She showed my resume, that really crappy resume site off, and I was like, yeah, I gotta change that. And then I spent, 2 years really sitting down and finding an original style, one I liked, unique. And now it's purple. It has I have my little logo of a tree on it, which I recommend if you're like a contract person, have like a logo or something. But
Content,
something that stands out. But yeah.
But I think another thing that you hit on is, you're, like I said, don't put your resume on some funky colored piece of paper, and don't print it like in pink ink.
Don't do that, no.
However, one of the things that I do think it's interesting, and I tested it a couple times, and it is very powerful. It's almost magic. If you are going to have color on your resume, because most people are going to look at these digitally, we don't print them out like we used to. I have like a block behind my name. I will color that block to the company's colors that I'm applying for. So if I was, applying to a company that I go out online and their logo is blue, I'd make that block blue. If their color is orange, I'd make that color orange. It is amazing the psychological impact that happens when someone sees, oh my gosh, that's our color. You've already identified with that company. And so, again, use those things sparingly. And we could do multiple sessions on resumes, but I think that's really important. And then one of the last things that I had, and I don't know how we are on time, but is, it's please don't put your picture on your resume.
Oh, God.
Please don't lead with father of 10 kids
Don't do
or,
that.
mother content creator, I have furry babies. Don't put any of that on your resume. It's just a little beyond what I think is professional.
Yeah.
I'm amazed in 2025 how many resumes I still see with a picture on them. And I don't know why people are doing that.
Well, and I want to...
I don't think it's appropriate.
This is something that's crazy because this is one of those things where if you look up how to make a good resume, that's what they tell you
Don't
to
put
do.
your picture.
Do not look up how to make a good resume. It is wrong. Because there are ways, because I do think, here's what I will say, because I think pictures on resumes are bad. The formats, most of the time, that those examples online give you are interesting. They have very interesting formats, but the pictures are always a bad call. So to give another example visually on screen here, my own resume, I actually took one of those picture-like formats, at least to some extent, but I replaced the picture with my logo of a tree.
That makes sense.
Because that's still iconic. You look at it and you're like, oh, that's an interesting little thing, and there's ways to use that to your advantage. But I definitely think something, because that's not even taught to us in school. That's just the internet being stupid.
Well, and what's interesting is, let's say you put your picture out there, and I know this sounds bizarre, and it's probably sensational. Somebody doesn't like facial hair.
Yep.
You're not going to get the opportunity because
Exactly.
you have facial hair. So why even do it? You're limiting your opportunities. And as an HR person who wants to hire the best person and not have any bias, I want to only look at the experiences. I immediately put a sticky over that picture because I don't want to see if you're male or you're female or you present that way.
Well, and I think what's important, we talked about this in DEI, right?
Yes.
No matter how much we want to be cognizant of it, no matter how much we want to not have a bias, you have a bias. Everyone has a bias, right? Like, even me, who's grown up among many different groups of people,
Yes.
right? I have a bias one way, and I think about it like acknowledging it, but there is always a level of that knowledge and bias you have towards certain groups of people you cannot control. It exists.
Well, it's even the way you present. Like, there are some professional pictures that I've seen, and the person just looks like an arrogant a-hole in the picture, and you're like, why would you have picked that picture?
Yep.
And then there's other pictures that you're like, that must have been taken on somebody's cell phone. I see, all kinds of stuff in the background. So it's just never a good idea. Now, I will say, once you get into a company, there's usually a professional mugshot. And I could talk about that sometime. I hate it when I'm told what color of jacket, what color of shirt I have. That just drives me crazy. Because I think it should be a candid shot that really shows a little bit of personality. It's not 1950, it's 2025. Okay, and those were the big things that I wanted to hit on resumes. Was there anything that you wanted me to hit on in particular that I didn't cover in my 6-point?
Well, we can quickly cover cover letters.
Oh, cover letters. You did ask about cover
briefly.
letters.
Because this won't take long. I think cover letters are one of those weird things where 5 years ago, not even 5 years, like 2-3 years ago, I would have been on the end of saying, very much like professors and stuff are talking about right now, cover letters were kind of fading out, right? But we're having a backlash to the backlash of no more cover letters, where when you now have a cover letter, now everyone notices it because no one else does a cover letter. So it's one of those things where it's like, cover letters, and I don't know how consistent this is because you would know more than me, but I know cover letters were pretty standard for a long time.
Oh, yeah, you always had to have a cover letter.
And now we're in the age, at least recently when I've applied to jobs, where sometimes they'll take a cover letter, sometimes they won't, sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. And it keeps flipping depending on both the company and when you're applying. Because I've had it where I've applied to, say, like big film companies, and they won't require a cover letter. But then the very next year they do. So it's a little weird. My advice, which is not much experience-wise, but my advice, at least from what I've seen, is... right now, we're in a weird phase where people don't know if cover letters are important or not. Do them anyway. I would always recommend just do them, because it's better that you do them and then not need it than don't do them and then need it. That's my opinion. But when it comes to cover letters, we can briefly cover how you should write them. And I think that is something that's a little important. But really, the way I think of a cover letter is when you're writing your resume micro descriptions for each role, your cover letter's there to expand on those individual pieces, where you start with, dear hiring manager 56, right? Yada, 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 yada. Give yourself a little intro at the beginning, then break down your experience in your jobs, how that links to what you're applying to.
Yes,
right? Which
it should
is
be
why,
relative to the job you're applying to. The cover letter should be very customized.
Cover letters should be customized for each position you're
Yes.
applying to. And then like a very end-like greeting, almost in a way where it's like, well, thank you for considering, and yada, yada, yada. But what's your quick input as we are tight on time, but we have time.
Well, what I would say is that, again, even maybe a year ago, I would have said, I think cover letters are pointless. I don't read cover letters by the time they come to me, but I'm not typically screening people. So I have gone and talked to folks that I know that are on my team or prior teams, or just that I know because of the nature of the job that I have, and asked, does a cover letter set you off? Or does a cover letter set the candidate off? And what I hear mostly is, well, the majority of what we get comes through online. It comes through LinkedIn, or it comes through some other type of online recruiting service, like now I can't think of
Indeed, ZipRecruiter.
ZipRecruiter. I was going to say, why can't I think of any? This is my space. But and a lot of times there is no cover letter. Now, I will say that in the applicant system that I have where I am today, you can upload a cover letter. I don't read it. I don't have any interest in the cover letter. The resume is fine, and I'm going to fill in the rest when I talk to you, or I get a summary from whoever screened you initially. So I don't think that they have that much value personally from my perspective. However, I agree with everything that you said. I think now, depending on the form in which you enter into the candidate pool, a cover letter would set you apart, because the majority of people don't create cover letters. I think if you're not a good writer, maybe you should consider not doing a cover letter. Now, you're a creative. You've got 2 writing degrees. You're a very good writer. I think that would help you a great deal.
Yeah.
And I think everything that you said as far as a little bit of expansion, customizing that, maybe when the resume was a little bit harder to customize to this job, customizing that cover letter is absolutely never going to hurt you.
Yep.
Unless the cover letter is a rambling incoherent of run-on sentences.
Yeah.
That's bad, because most people in business do understand at least, sentence structure. And if you're not a great writer, or you're not going to spell check, you might want to be thoughtful. I actually sat in on a calibration meeting where we were interviewing people, and the hiring manager's boss was on the calibration session too. And he made some statement about, I was looking at the resume, and the bullet points for four jobs ago were exactly the same bullet points as the job they're in today, and those jobs don't have the same scope, responsibility, or title. And so that's one more thing. Make sure in that resume that whatever you put in there is not peanut butter cut and paste, that it is specific to that job. You don't want to say the exact same thing. Even if it was the same job, you want to change it up a little bit. And you don't want to, in the cover letter, if you're going to do one, just regurgitate in paragraph form what you put in the resume.
Don't do that.
It needs to be special. It needs to set it apart. It might be your interest in this job, or why I think this job is my career expectation. And the resume needs to sell you. So let's be honest, some of us just need a job. I understand that. And this might not be my dream job. That's okay too. But don't say that in your cover letter. You know, in your cover letter, if you're going to have one, talk about how I think this job is the next step for me, or the first step for me, or these are the things I want to learn from this job that I don't have experience in, and showcase how you've been able to learn and expand and grow, however that has played out in your life. So a little bit of a long answer, but I think if you want to do a cover letter, you should, but I think it's okay if you don't.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a great way to end this episode 5. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you all next week for whatever the topic is that week. And yeah, everyone have a great weekend. We'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.